everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Blair Garth. I'm president of the temple here. And Tom Vogelman has volunteered to do a great concert for us tonight. It was about a year and a half.
I didn't volunteer, you forced me.
Just like I said, I volunteered. We did a year and a half ago, Tom?
2 years.
2 years. Has it been that long?
Mayor, 2 years.
2 years ago. We did a concert, and so we asked him if he would do another one. And he graciously accepted with a small amount of arm twisting. It wasn't very much so. We'd like to have an opening prayer, and then I will have Al Woodhouse, who's known Tom for 100 years?
At least.
A very, very long time. Give us a little introduction to Tom Vogel. Brother Peterson, could we get you to offer a prayer as we start this evening, please?
Our Father who dwells in heaven, we're so grateful for this opportunity we have to be together and to hear this music. We pray that Thou will bless our performer, that he will have Thy Spirit with him, that he'll be able to perform to His satisfaction and to our pleasure. We pray for Thy Spirit in this music, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Tom is having this built tonight for posterity, as he just said, so that they will know that he's something more than a mechanic. I know Tom as the person in this building who, as long as I can remember, knows everything about this building, every pipe, every brick, everything that goes on in this building, he knows all about. So it's been great. So, Al, would you do us a favor of introducing your friend Tom?
Thank you. This is a very special treat for me to say a few words about Tom Vogelman. We're in for a very special treat tonight to hear Tom play, and that he's so generous in so many ways, and generous in sharing his talents. And he's been so generous, as most of you know, in so many other ways, in sharing his time and his talents in other ways. And there are many here who have called upon Tom because of his ability to fix things, and he is a master at that. Anything that you can think of that needs fixing, Tom has the skill and the ability to fix it. And I've known that about Tom for a long time, and I've taken advantage of his talents and skills on many different occasions. Tom is a musician, and I remember things about Tom. Now, I've known Tom going way back, well over
42 years.
42 years. Tom has been a friend. I knew Tom when I served as a bishop of one of the wards here in this city for some 8 years. And Tom became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at that time, and I had the privilege of being his bishop for many years. In fact, Tom is my neighbor. He lives very close in the complex where I live in Tribeca. So we have been neighbors for many years as well. Let me just say a few words about me, Tom, and music. I guess as far back as I can remember, Tom has loved music. He has he's practiced. I remember in his apartment, he brought a piano up there to the 34th floor where he lived. The piano was brought up there. And Tom was preparing for his, for his dissertation, on his PhD. And so he had a piano brought up there. And because, as you know, for a pianist like Tom, practicing is going to cause problems with the neighbors. So what he did, as I said, he can fix anything, he can build anything. So he built this structure, a little room within a room around his piano that was completely soundproof. So so that he could practice the piano and not disturb his neighbors. His love for music has carried over to his family. And those of you who know Tom, you know that his children are also musical, and they also play instruments. He has a daughter who is an accomplished violinist. And in fact, in June, she's going to be playing with the London Symphony Orchestra. So his talent has carried over, and I should say his wife's talent, because Megumi also loves music, and she is a singer, has a beautiful voice. So this musical talent has carried over to their children. They have a wonderful, beautiful family, and it's my privilege to have known them for many years. So tonight, Tom is going to play for us. So we're going to have the opportunity to experience and to listen to his particular talent. And I love Tom. He's been a good friend. And it's just wonderful that he can share his talent this evening with all of us. And so, Tom, I think without further accolades for you, we'll turn the time over to you so you can get to your piano, and so we can listen to the music you prepared for us.
In keeping with the nature of this auditorium, it'd be appreciated probably if we hold the applause until the end of the concert, okay? Isn't that more appropriate?
That's fine.
Okay, very good. Well, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I'd like to start off with a quotation you probably remember in Charles Dickens' beloved Christmas story, A Christmas Carol. It starts out like this: Marley is dead. Old Marley is as dead as a doornail. Remember that? This fact must be distinctly understood. And I'd like to start off by saying, I am a mechanic. By profession, I'm a professional mechanic. This must be distinctly understood. If any of you came to hear a flawless performance by a concert pianist, you, my friends, are on the wrong side of Columbus Avenue. Across this road, you have Lincoln Center, and there you'll have beautiful, flawless performances. So if anybody finds themselves on the wrong side of the street, you may get up and leave. I won't be offended. You will not offend me. You may cross the street and hear really great music. But do keep it in mind. I was working on Saturdays for Carlos in the Temple for many years, or for I guess 2 or 3 years, and I got to know all the couples, but they changed the schedule a year ago, and so a lot of these couples, I'm sorry, I guess I don't know you, but I hope to get to know you, and I appreciate your attendance tonight. It's my pleasure to present this program to you. Just for those of you who are not aware, I was hired as the engineer of this building, the facilities engineer, when it was built back in 1975, and I worked here for 35 years till my retirement a few years ago. And at that time, before that, my wife was saying, you know, when you retire from your church job, you should get back to doing something you really love to do when you were young, and that's play the piano. I told her there is no way I can do that. I've been a mechanic doing very heavy mechanical work for 35 years. You know what that does to your fingers? It makes them very stiff and clumsy and uncoordinated and insensitive. There is no way I can do it. And she said, well, that's okay, do it anyway. And I said, besides, you know that I'm losing my hearing. It's a genetic problem in my family. And I never noticed it, though, until I was about, maybe 25 years ago. I started losing my hearing in the top range. I can't even hear correctly the pitches on about this much of the top of the piano. I hear pitches, but they bear no relationship, what I hear, to the actual pitch. And so when I'm playing up there, I have to depend on what the fingers think, the keys they think they should play. I can't depend on what I'm hearing. And she said, that's okay, do it anyway. And I said, besides, I have LASIK surgery. And I have monovision. I have one distance eye and one reading eye, which is not as bizarre as it sounds, but it's a little discombobulating. And she said, that's okay anyway. And I said, besides, you know my hands are small. Most pianists have a thumb that comes out about this angle. I have very narrow hands, which makes it difficult for me to play difficult music. And besides, I'm getting some disease. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Arthritis, have you ever heard of that? Ah, some of you have, right? Maybe you, all right, well then I'm not the only one in the world. And you know how it makes your knuckles swell up and distorts your fingers and it hurts, right? So far, the pleasure I get from playing the piano is greater than the pain, but that ratio is changing. And this, you know, when the pain trumps the pleasure, that's the end of that. And that may come so. This may very well be the last time I try to do anything like this. Very well might be the last time. So now you're probably thinking, well, she said, you know, we'll go and do it anyway. You're probably thinking I'm trying to lower expectations. Maybe there's something of that, but I'm trying to be honest with you. And also, you're probably thinking, if I have all these handicaps, I've got a lot of gall to play this kind of music, right, on the program. Well, if you're thinking that, you're right. I do have a lot of nerve, but it's because I love the music so much and I'd love to share it with people. So with all those handicaps, my wife said, that's okay, do it anyway. She's very persuasive. If you know her, you know that if she wants something to happen, it will happen. I always maintain that if she were in charge, Japan would have won the war. So anyway, it is what it is. I decided, when President Garf asked me to do it, I said, well, I'll risk it anyway. Notice, very informal. No tuxedo, not even a suit. Very informal, right? I was thinking of wearing my mechanic's uniform to drive home the point, but my wife said, no, don't belabor the point. Everybody in the audience will know what your occupation is when they hear how mechanically you play the piano. So, so very informal. Feel free to boo and hiss and throw rotten vegetables if the spirit so moves you to do so. But I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to talk a little bit about each composer. We're going to start with Domenico Scarlatti. We have a photo of Scarlatti. He was born in Italy, but lived most of his life in Portugal and Spain. He had the good fortune of teaching a young girl by the name of Maria Magdalena Barbara how to teach the harpsichord. She was actually the Princess of Portugal, and when she grew up, she married King Ferdinand of Spain and became Queen Maria Barbara of Spain, upon which point she hired her former teacher, Scarlatti, to come and be the music master of her palace in Madrid. He wrote a lot of music, but he's chiefly known for the little sonatas he wrote for harpsichord. Next photo will show you a harpsichord. These are not long sonatas, they're very short. Notice how ornate they are. Look at the next photo. Most of them had one keyboard, but many of them had two keyboards, as you can see, like organs. And some of them, take a look at the next one, even had three keyboards. And the next one shows another with three keyboard harpsichord. They were real works of art because the only people that could afford them were, of course, the nobility, and they made sure that they were not only musical instruments, but visual works of art as well. Next one shows another two keyboard harpsichord. Now these sonatas are not long, like I say, they're only a couple pages each, but he wrote 555 of them. Amazing, and every one is different, and they're full of unique little musical ideas. They're so much fun. And the first one I'm going to play is a little piece, kind of a saucy little thing, sort of a tempting, taunting kind of a piece, you could say, maybe a little on the sassy side. And it goes like this. Aren't they cute? They're saucy little things, a little sassy, but no big crash bang ending like Beethoven or Brahms, but every one is delightful to play. The second one I'm going to play is a busy, busy little one. I don't know what was going through Scarlatti's mind when he wrote it, maybe a beehive or an ant colony or something, you know. Maybe he looked out his window and he saw the equivalent of Times Square in the Madrid there. And it sounds to me like people running all around all at the same time. It's a very, very busy little piece. It reminds me of Grand Central Station, actually, at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. What do you think? Grand Central Station during rush hour? Times Square? Walmart's on Black Friday? People running all around. New York City on the last shopping day before Christmas? It'd be interesting to know what was in Scarlatti's mind when he wrote that. It's just very delightful music. Okay, on to Johann Sebastian Bach. Here's a picture of Bach as a young man, born in 1685. And as a matter of fact, same year that Domenico Scarlatti was born, right? If you notice in your program. Somebody else was born on that year that you may have heard of. You ever hear of George Frederick Handel, who wrote The Messiah? Same year. 1685 was an amazing year for musicians, wasn't it? 3 of the greatest composers born that same year. Absolutely my favorite composer. With Bach, came from a very musical family, and after a number of years in very small town posts, he was appointed to be a cantor and head of music at Thomaskirche in Leipzig, the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. There's the church there. A position he held for most of the rest of his life. He composed tremendous amount of music, just an unbelievable amount. Most of it sacred music, most of it consisting of cantatas. What is a cantata? It's a work for orchestra and chorus, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10 movements or more. And each one is based on a particular religious theme. The Protestant church, each week of the year, has a theme based on certain scriptures. Well, the Catholic church too. And Bach was expected to write a cantata every Sunday for the service based on that particular theme for that Sunday. And then the minister would get up and have a powerful, fiery sermon to drive the point home, and the music would support it as well. Well, that's a lot of music to write every week, but he did it. That's about 50 cantatas a year, right? And he did it 5 times. Multiply it out, some 250 cantatas. Incredible. About 200 of them survive to this day. But it's just an unbelievable amount of work. And then, of course, he had special cantatas for Christmas and Easter and other holidays. And he even had to write a lot of secular music, not sacred music, for activities like the local duke's daughter's wedding, something like that. So he wrote a lot of secular music as well. There's so much music, they figured that if you even tried to copy out all the music he wrote, it would take a lifetime just to copy it. And here he was composing it. And so I'm going to play a number from one of the most famous cantatas of Bach, number 147, Herz und Mund und Tat und Leben, my heart, my mouth, my deeds, my life, all dedicated to my Savior. That's the title of the cantata. And it's in 2 parts, and both parts he ends with a chorale, the famous chorale which you've probably all heard. What is a chorale? It's a hymn. It's the kind of hymns that the German congregation would sing in their Sunday services, the same as we do. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with Martin Luther's famous "Mighty Fortress is Our God," right? Well, the chorale that this one is based on has that same kind of spirit. It sounds like this. Same strong German, steadfast, powerful hymn tune, chorale. And that particular one you have on the back of your program. Originally was written not by Bach, but by a composer and violinist by the name of Johann Schopp. First appeared in a German hymn book of 1642, even over 40 years before Bach was even born. But he used this chorale tune in a couple of his cantatas, and this is the most famous setting of it. So I'd like to show you where it came from. Now, for those of you who didn't have time to eat supper tonight, and depending on the refreshments, which I understand some of you may have brought, well, you are going to have to sing for your supper tonight, because you and we, all of us, are going to sing this chorale. And then I'm going to show you what Bach did with it to make it world famous. So, take your program. I'm going to play it first of all, so you get the sound of it, and then we will sing it. This is how it sounds. Then it repeats. Second part. Ready to sing? I'm going to ask my wife to conduct. You don't need to use the words, just la 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 is fine. Okay? There's your pitch. There we go. Repeat. sounded great. You're wonderful. Hey, maybe you should be singing instead of me playing. Sounded wonderful. And I could hear my wife too. Doesn't she have a gorgeous voice? Clear as a bell. Now, Bach takes that chorale tune and he does some interesting things with it. First of all, he changes the time signature. Instead of 4/4 time, changes the 3/4. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and so forth. He puts a bass to it. He puts a couple middle voices, one of which sounds like this. And then while the chorus is singing this beautiful, magnificent chorale, the orchestra is playing a gorgeous counter melody, which is actually a variation of the tune itself, above it, like putting the frosting on the cake, so to speak. And so the chorus will sing a line, and then there'll be an orchestral interlude, and the chorus will sing the next line, and another interlude, and so forth. Now, I would like to, by the way, the next picture shows Bach's seal. Can you see his JSB? It's kind of off the screen. Opposite side is the mirror image. Isn't that interesting? And in the middle, they are both superimposed. See that? That was Bach's personal seal that he used. The next picture shows the arrangement I'm going to be playing. It was arranged by Dom Myra Hess, who had been given the highest honor that the British royalty can confer upon a British citizen. Famous early 20th century pianist. Very popular before, during, and after World War II. She heard this at one point, and she was so enraptured that she made this arrangement of it. This is a piano arrangement of the orchestral and choral Virgin that Bach wrote. This is an actual copy of the original manuscript. You see the orchestra starts at the top, and down here, where it thins out, that's where the chorus comes in. And it's hard, you can't read Bach's writing there, handwriting, but the words are on your program that he used. He didn't use the original chorale words, which were Werde munter mein Gemüte. He used a different verses that he had made up. And you can't read it, but it does say up there, Wohl mir, dass ich Jesus habe. I'm so fortunate that I have Jesus in my life. And so these are the words that you can follow along. But this is the arrangement that Myra Hess made. I was very fortunate to hear Myra Hess in person. One of the last concerts that she gave, I was in my early teens. It was probably in the late 50s, because she passed away shortly after that. And I was fortunate to hear her in the Orchestra Hall in Chicago, a marvelous pianist. And this is the arrangement that she made. So you can take a look at that, and you won't be able to read it, but this is how her arrangement sounds. See if you can hear the chorale tune wherever it appears. who can write like Bach? Is it any wonder that that has become world famous and has been arranged for about every combination of instruments except drums maybe, or tuba and kazoo, and maybe there's even an arrangement for tuba and kazoo somewhere. Beautiful thing that the whole world has fallen in love with. It's no wonder that it's become so very, very famous. Of course, remember, this is not piano music. This is for chorus and orchestra. And if any of you ever get a chance to hear it in the original, for chorus and orchestra, don't miss it. It's a thrilling experience. Now, the other piece I'm going to play is quite different, a real contrast. He wrote a lot of music for solo instruments, a lot of chamber music. He wrote a lot of suites, and these suites of dances usually consist of anywhere from 6 or 8, maybe 10 movements occasionally, each dance originating in a different country originally. They were very popular back in the Baroque era. And he wrote the next, for example, the next photo shows the first page of the first violin unaccompanied sonata for violin. He wrote 6 of these for unaccompanied violin, 6 for cello, a lot for the harpsichord. See the fluid writing? That's such a beautiful thing. You know, they could play that music for my funeral, and I would blissfully, happily drift off to hell probably, most likely, but at any rate, I'm not going to play a whole suite, just the first movement of one of his harpsichord suites. Most of them started with a prelude. What's a prelude? Something that goes before something else, right? The first movement of a work that consists of more than one movement. And I'm just going to play the prelude from one of his suites. Each of these preludes had a sort of a different character. One of them, for example, is written in the style of a French overture, really grand, you know, Louis XIV kind of sound. This one is not. In this prelude, Bach seems to be imitating the style that was very popular in England with English harpsichordists and English composers. They loved lots of runs up and down the keyboard and cross-hand technique and things like that. And that seems to be what Bach is imitating in this particular prelude. He calls it Preambulum, but it's one of these preludes. Quite different, wouldn't you say? Quite a contrast from the sacred music before. But he wrote a lot of delightful harpsichord music. It's not easy to play on a piano because the piano requires over 4 times the force to depress a key that a harpsichord does. Harpsichord has a feather touch, but piano is over 4 times as heavy to get the keys down, but it's just delightful stuff. And I really love Bach. I think it was, who was it? I think Albert Schweitzer, who was a noted authority on Bach, among his other accomplishments. He was the one who once said that Bach's name should never have been Bach, which means brook in German, a little stream. He said his name should have been Ocean for the tremendous output that he produced and the depth of emotion. It's staggering amount of the greatest music, some of the greatest music ever written. Okay, on to Mozart. Here we're getting into piano music now. So far it's been for harpsichord. Now, actually the piano had been invented during Bach's lifetime, but it was not well known. The range was narrow. It was a very pitiful kind of sound. As a matter of fact, Bach's fame had spread far and wide, and so the King Frederick the Great of Prussia invited Bach to visit him in his palace in Potsdam. And so when Bach arrived there, the king took Bach into his music room, even without waiting for Bach to change his traveling clothes, and he showed him proudly all of his instruments. Now, King Frederick the Great was actually a music lover himself and a pretty good amateur musician. He was a flutist. He wrote about 100 flute sonatas. He loved music. He had quite an extensive music collection. He showed Bach all his music instruments, including this newfangled thing, the piano, which was called at that time, he said, it was called cembalo, which means harpsichord. Cembalo col piano e forte. Harpsichord was soft and loud, reflecting the fact that you could, on a piano, you could vary the volume by how hard you hit the key, something you cannot do on a harpsichord. And so he wanted Bach to play his new cembalo col piano e forte, which, by the way, was shortened to piano e forte and then piano forte, or sometimes forte piano. But by the 19th century, it ended up with pianoforte, the soft loud. And by the 20th century, it shortened to piano. So when I play, I'm playing the soft, which makes no sense because most pianists prefer playing loud to playing soft. It should be called the forte, right? But it is what it is. We call it the piano. Anyway, he had Bach played the piano and asked his opinion. Well, reportedly, Bach was diplomatic about it and said, well, it's an interesting instrument, but I still prefer the harpsichord and the organ. Well, why not? Because, as I said, the piano tone at that point was pathetic. It really was. Whereas the harpsichord had a robust tone. It was the peak of its development. And the piano was a baby, it was so bad, as a matter of fact, that nobody was interested in making any of it, and kind of died out until a German harpsichord maker by the name of Silbermann started experimenting before Bach actually passed away and made a few pianos that Bach did approve of. So it was coming along, actually. And by the time Mozart started to go on tours, the piano had pretty much replaced the harpsichord. Not entirely, but the harpsichord became increasingly old-fashioned and obsolete as the piano range widened and the tone got more robust and so forth. This is another early piano. It looks like a harpsichord, doesn't it? Again, if nobility orders an instrument built, it has to be a visual work of art as well as a musical instrument. And so Mozart, as you know, was a child prodigy. He wrote a piece at the age of 4, believe it or not. And it had so many notes in it that when he showed his father, Leopold, who was a professional musician himself, his father told him, Wolfgang, nobody could ever play this. There's too many notes in it. And little 4-year-old Wolfgang's reply will ring a bell with any of you who ever studied an instrument as a child. 4-year-old Mozart looked up at his father and said, I know, that's why. You have to practice it, then you can play it. The first pieces he started writing at about the age of 6. And his father took him and his older sister on a tour of Europe. He was a boy wonder. He just amazed everybody who heard him because he was so amazingly precocious in piano and violin and in composing too. And as we know, he died tragically at the age of 35 after producing a staggering output for those years. He was composing little pieces at 6. By the time he was 14, he was composing operas, the 5 famous violin concertos, loved all over the world. He completed before he even turned 20, in the late teens. He was very precocious and very sensitive. He was not a large man, he was rather small. His hair was voluminous and very fine, and it is said that he was somewhat vain about his hair. But later his hairdresser wrote that it was very difficult to dress Mozart's hair because every few minutes Mozart would jump up and run over to the clavier, to the piano, and try out a musical phrase that just popped in his head and starts experimenting with it. The next picture, yeah, you saw a few of them as he was a child. The one before that, he was probably, 6 or 7 years old. The next one is maybe 10 or 12, something like that. And the next one, in his late teens or about 20, is said to be a very, very close likeness. You may say, well, hey, that looks like different people each time. Remember, this is before cameras were invented. If you had 10 different people painted a portrait, you're going to say, is that the same person? But this was supposedly a very close resemblance to Mozart. The next one is a replica of a piano that Mozart would have played as a young man when he was a freelancer in Vienna. It's an early piano. Notice the black and white keys, the colors reversed from modern instruments, which was quite common in those days. But the next photo shows a score. That's Mozart's writing. It's actually part of his Requiem, the last thing that he wrote. He never even finished it. And the next photo shows an unfinished portrait of him by his brother-in-law. Mozart died before they could finish this portrait of Mozart. I'm going to play a fantasy that Mozart wrote. In those days, a fantasy was a piece of music which didn't have to follow any particular structure. It didn't have to be written in sonata form or concerto form or anything like that. The composer was free to write as his fancy dictated. And this fantasy in D minor is very, very rhapsodic. I mean, it really sounds almost like Beethoven in many, many places. It's sad, it's dramatic. Generally, it's a sad kind of sounding piece. It's as though Mozart is brooding about all the sadness in the life. Sometimes it sounds agitated and sometimes almost angry. But Mozart had a very playful side to his character too. And the music comes to a certain point where Mozart seems to say, hold on, enough brooding. Let's have some fun. And the fantasy sounds like this. can write like Mozart? I know I said that about Bach, but those two in my book are the greatest. They're supposedly the two composers with the highest IQ of any composer of Western music. And it shows that their music is close to perfection. There's not an unneeded note, and there's not a note lacking. It's the most perfect music, I think, ever written. Interestingly enough, a lot of the music that Mozart wrote for the piano could be played by a very talented youngster, but it takes a really great artist, which I'm not, of course, to play it really, really well. Many piano competitions will have a preliminary, a semifinal, and a finalist. On the preliminaries and the semifinals, they have lots of big virtuoso stuff, to weed out those who can't handle the big guns. And interestingly enough, on the finals, when they narrow it down to the last few finalists, among other things, they will often schedule Mozart. Because artistically speaking, to play it with taste and expression, it will separate the men from the boys, musically speaking. Or the women from the girls. I don't mean to be chauvinistic about this. That often is a deciding factor. And this is true piano music. Of course, many musicians do not even believe that Mozart wrote most of the music that was attributed to him. Well, who wrote it then? It was written in heaven by God. Mozart was merely the conduit through which it flowed to mankind. It is so perfect. Okay, on to Chopin, Frédéric Chopin. Here shows Chopin as a young man. Chopin, born in Poland, but moved to France as a young man, and never went back, never lived in Poland again. Spent the rest of his life in France, chiefly Paris. Absolutely revolutionized the way piano music is written. And one of his first concerts, the composer Robert Schumann was in the audience. At the end, he got up, turned around, faced the audience, and he said, "Hats off, gentlemen, a genius." And he was right. Chopin was so far ahead of his time, absolutely unique in music history. And so he has always been very, very beloved by people all over the world. He was the first composer to really exploit the capabilities of the modern piano. He drew sonorities out of the piano that no one had ever thought of before. He made the piano sing. He's often called the poet of the piano, and I agree with that. He's certainly the most poetic. His music is aristocratic and yet very sensuous. It's by turns dramatic and romantic and all different moods. He wrote 2 piano concertos, some chamber music, but most of his output is for solo piano. He wrote books of waltzes and mazurkas and preludes and scherzos and ballades and nocturnes and etudes, and mostly for piano, and he never wrote anything bad. Or if he did, he threw it away. He destroyed it. Virtually everything he wrote is still in the active repertoire of pianists all over the world. He didn't write anything bad, or if he did, he threw it in the fire. There are other composers that sometimes did write some things that are not so good. Beethoven wrote a few things that just aren't very good. But you can forgive Beethoven for that, for the tremendous music that he did write that is unbelievable. But Chopin never wrote anything bad. Everything he wrote is just, it has that magic touch to it. He didn't live very long. He only lived 4 years longer than Mozart. He died at the age of 39. The next one shows a piano that he used for many years, an old upright piano. There's a score of his music writing. He really tended to belabor pieces to death. That was the last piano that he owned, actually. But if he had a musical idea, he'd sit down and make a rough draft of it, and he'd work at it and belabor it for days and weeks on end, frustrating, scratching things out, rewriting things, pacing back and forth, breaking his pens in frustration. And the interesting thing is at the end of many weeks of work, he generally ended up with almost exactly what he first started out with. He was right the first time around. That's his piano. There's a score. This is actually a photograph. The camera was invented during Chopin's lifetime. So this is a very, very, very old, one of the very first photographs ever taken. This is near the end of his life. He was not in good health. He was very, very sick at that time. but that was a photograph of him. And the next one is a famous portrait of Chopin by Delacroix, which I think is very artistic. But Chopin certainly has found a place in the hearts of people around the world. Now I'm going to play a nocturne. About a year ago, I saw a movie called The Pianist. And by the way, that's how it's pronounced, pianist, right? In case you've heard pianist and pianist and didn't know which is correct and didn't know who to ask, it's pianist, right? I don't know what a piano is, but it's a pianist. If you have trouble remembering, just remember that a person who plays a trombone is not a trombonist, he's a trombonist. And a person who plays a guitar is not a guitarist, he's a guitarist. And a person who plays a piano is a pianist. Anyway, this is called The Pianist. It's the story of a concert pianist. It's based on a true story, by the way. A concert pianist who was trapped in the Warsaw Ghetto when the Nazis overran Poland. It's a gripping movie. Have anybody seen that? Let me see. Anybody? Yeah, some of you have. If you haven't, see it. It's a gripping movie. I highly recommend it. And it's a true story, too. A beautiful, wonderful movie. And the movie starts off with this concert pianist in a radio recording studio before the war. And he's playing this nocturne. And well, I'd heard the nocturne before. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? All Chopin nocturnes are beautiful. What is a nocturne anyway? Night music, right? Music to fall asleep by? Maybe, although in a lot of Chopin nocturnes, there's a violent thunderstorm that rises up in the middle of the night, in the middle of the nocturne. Not this one that I'm going to play. Anyway, he's playing this nocturne in the movie, and it is, I heard it before, but this time it sounded so beautiful. And I thought, I've never learned that one, I want to learn it. And so I did. and this is what it sounds like. Who could write like Chopin? I know I'm sounding like a broken record, aren't I? Well, who can write for the piano, I should say. This is quintessential piano music. Everything I've played up to this point, the Scarlatti, the Bach, the Mozart, and any of their contemporaries, Beethoven, Schubert, Haydn, you could play on almost any instrument and it would sound just about as good. Not with Chopin. Chopin is quintessential piano music. If you try to play it on any other instrument, it would sound silly. And that's why Chopin is a pianist composer, because the music he wrote is so idiosyncratic to the piano, to the instrument itself. And it's no wonder that he's so beloved all over the world. Okay, Chopin himself did not have a tremendous virtuoso technique like some of his contemporaries, like Franz Liszt, for example, but the delicate, shimmering sonorities that he brought out of the piano absolutely seduced his audience, often leaving them in tears. It was so beautiful. Okay, finishing up, Rachmaninoff shows him as a young boy. Rachmaninoff, late Russian romantic composer, pianist, conductor, last of the really great romantic composers in the Russian tradition, with a very, very distinctive sound. He was born in 1873 and passed away 6 days before I was born. Not that that means anything. That dates me, doesn't it? His music has a very, very distinctive sound to it, unmistakable, kind of sad, melancholy, complaining, yearning kind of sound to it. I think he was influenced very much by the very sad and sometimes tragic history of the Russian people. I think it could not help but have influenced the way he wrote music and the kinds of things that he was trying to express in music. He studied the Moscow Conservatory, and when he graduated, the graduation required a jury exam in which the candidate was supposed to perform some of his own compositions if he also composed. And Rachmaninoff did that. And on his jury exam, when he graduated, on the jury was Tchaikovsky himself. And in those days, you could get a score from 1 to 5. Almost no one ever got a 5. But the next day, when the scores were published, Tchaikovsky had given Rachmaninoff, young Rachmaninoff, not only a 5, but he put a plus before it, a plus above it, a plus below it, and 2 pluses after it. He recognized the great genius that was there with Rachmaninoff. He was a phenomenal pianist. Look at his hands. He had such a hand span. With one hand, he could play with the 5 fingers this. It takes me 2 hands to play that. That's the span that he had. His hand span was so enormous. And he wrote all his piano music as though everybody that's going to play it has that kind of hand span too. The mean man he was. Nasty trick. Who can do it? Anyway, the next one shows him at the Steinway. He had a great sense of humor, though, too. He was giving a violin and piano recital in the early part of the 20th century with the famous late 19th and early 20th century violinist Fritz Kreisler. You recall the name? And midway through one of the pieces, Fritz Kreisler had a memory slip. Just suddenly lost it. And after fiddling around for a few moments, he whispered out of the corner of his mouth to Rachmaninoff, "Where are we?" And without missing a note, Rachmaninoff whispered back, "In Carnegie Hall!" The next photo shows him very late in life, as many people remembered him. Great, great pianist, great conductor, and composer as well. We've seen quite an evolution of piano from that first spindly little cembalo called piano e forte, and we're ending up now, as you can see, with quite a monster, aren't we? Right? That's what we have here, a Steinway Concert Grand. From a pathetic tone to a monster that can squeak and can roar like a lion, can't it? The next picture shows, again, what the kind of piano we have here. It's an interesting evolution of the piano, isn't it? I'm going to play two preludes that Rachmaninoff wrote. Now, the first one, and first of all, what's a prelude? Well, with Bach, it was something that came before something else, wasn't it? By the time Rachmaninoff lived, prelude, the term prelude didn't mean anything. They could be independent, standalone pieces. If you wrote a piece of music and didn't know what to call it a prelude, right? Doesn't mean anything in particular. The first one that I'm going to play, to me, represents contrasts. Sweet memories, sad memories. Like sunshine and clouds, smiles and tears. Though I better be careful of what I tell you because it may strike you differently than it strikes me. That's the disadvantage that instrumental music has. We don't have words. Vocal music has the words. There's a story. We know what it's all about, don't we? Whether it's a gospel choir singing, or a rock artist belting out something in a rock concert, or the Metropolitan Opera singing an opera. There's words. There's meaning to it. There's a story. But instrumental music rarely has. I mean, there's some. Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, the big booming of the cannon. You know that it's about the War of 1812, right? Or Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, where you have the bird calls, the chirping of the birds in the forest. But most instrumental music doesn't have a story. It's a disadvantage, and yet I feel that if instrumental music is well written by a great composer, it has the ability to express emotions which cannot be expressed in words. We have certain feelings inside, but we can't put our finger, we can't describe it. It's something we feel. And so I better be careful about telling you what I think this or that piece sounds like to me, because Rachmaninoff might come and haunt me. He might give me a nightmare tonight and in my dream and say, no, that's not what I was thinking when I wrote that piece. There's no story. It's not that at all. It's musical poetry without words. Don't try to make up a story. So what I play, you may have a very different opinion of. But anyway, that's the first one. The second one I'm going to play is he marks alla marcia, like a march. And except for a very lyrical middle section, it is very, very much a march-like kind of piece, which at the very end vanishes like in a puff of smoke into thin air. All right. Okay, thank you. All right, one encore. 2 years ago, remember I played a piece by the name, by composer by the name of Louis Moreau Gottschalk, American pianist and composer, died shortly after the Civil War. He was a pianist, very charismatic, toured Central and South America and in Europe, where he was all the rage because the Europeans could not believe that a violent, barbaric, uncivilized country like the United States could actually produce a musician, let alone composer. But he used to come on stage wearing white gloves, like Liberace. Right? He'd take off these white gloves very ceremoniously. And during the concert, all the women in the audience would swoon. They swooned a lot in the 19th century, apparently. And at the end of the concert, he would drop one of his white gloves on the piano as he walked off the stage, at which point the stage was mobbed by all the women who fought tooth and nail to get a few precious threads of that white glove as a memento. 19th century, great time. Anyway, I recall I played a piece that he wrote called The Banjo, which he had published in France to give a little extra snob appeal. I mean, just think of how many more copies you could sell. Instead of calling it the banjo, you could call it le banjo, right? Anyway, I'm going to play another piece by Louis Moreau Gottschalk. By the way, he wrote one of the hymns in our hymn book, God Our Father, Hear Us Pray. That's Gottschalk. He didn't write it as a hymn, but that's his melody, that's his tune. I'm going to play a piece that he wrote called Tournament Gallop. Now, you know what a tournament is. This gallop is spelled with one L, G-A-L-O-P. Gallop in the 19th century was a dance, a popular dance in 2/4 time, very popular in the early and mid-19th century. And this tournament gallop starts the way you'd think a tournament starts, with the trumpets and the drums are announcing, calling all of the contestants to come to the starting line, right? And this little gallop with one L, somehow by the time it gets near the finish line, seems to gain an additional L and become more of the kind of gallop that we're familiar with. thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming. Isn't that silly? Fun though. Mozart, it is not. I'd like to thank you all for coming and thank especially my wife for the patience she's shown with me in this project, and thank President Gar for this opportunity. And I would especially, I cannot finish without giving credit where credit is due, and that is to a very kind Father in heaven who, for some unknown reason, has given me the opportunity in my old age to enjoy this beautiful music. Because without his help through this program, there is no way I could have gotten through all this difficult music without repeatedly breaking down. And so I thank him from the bottom of my heart. And I thank all of you for coming and allowing me to share this music with you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the light.